Hi, my name is Colby. Welcome to another one of my 10-minute YouTube tutorials. In our tutorial today, we're going to learn how to paint a watercolor succulent. First step in painting a kind of realistic watercolor succulent is to do the sketch. So take out a pencil and we're going to just sketch out the leaves of the plant. So we're going to start in the middle. First, draw kind of like a heart shape with a line in the middle, like that. And that's going to be just the middle leaf where all of the flesh, I guess, of the succulent are closed in, okay? And then using this shape, like an open bracket kind of shape, just draw around, starting small, draw around the heart shape. And then we're basically going to draw these brackets getting slightly bigger as the succulent gets slightly bigger. I'm going to show you a different angle so you can see the pencil a little better. Okay, so using our pencil, we're just drawing these brackets layered on top of each other. And because we're going to paint on top of these, we're going to paint mini gradients in each of these leaves here, you want to make sure to leave plenty of space to form the gradient. And you can basically go until you want to stop. I think that's the cool part about succulents. There's so many layers. It's really up to you how many leaves you want to paint. So I think I'm just going to draw a couple more. And I'm going to stop there. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so that's step one. Okay, now that we have the sketch, we're going to paint layer one. So before we do any kind of gradient painting, I'm just going to do a very, very light layer of watercolor right on top. And I'm not doing individual leaves this time. I'm painting across the whole thing. Now that we have a very light, you can see just very light of this turquoise layer on top of my sketch, I'm going to start painting my gradients. And each gradient has a couple different steps. So first, I'm going to get one leaf. When we were painting these gradients on the succulents, we're going to paint them one leaf at a time. And so I'm going to be very careful to stay in line with the outline I have here, and I'm just going to paint it either with water or with that very light watery paint that we used to paint the succulent. Either would be fine. The point is to just get this barely wet. So we don't want it too wet, we don't want any puddles, but we want it wet enough that it's going to stay wet for a little bit, okay? So we have gotten the first layer down of water, and then we're going to pick up some fairly pigmented paint and along the bottom, just kind of tap the paint onto the leaf. This is called the wet on wet technique, when you're painting with watercolor on a wet surface, and you see how it just kind of blooms up like that gradually. So we're just going to paint along the bottom of this leaf right here, and then wash off the color from your paintbrush, and so we don't have any color, just a little bit of water, and using your paintbrush, just kind of manually blend this pigment upward like that. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to wash it off, keep washing it off to make sure that the brush is clean, and then manually blend the paint upward to create this kind of natural gradient. And you may find that as you are doing that, the bottom of the leaf isn't quite as dark as you wanted it to because you moved a lot of the pigment upward. That's totally fine. You can still go back and add even more to create a dark shadow right here. So the reason that it's shaded like this is because this is the shadow where the layers that are on top of each other are blocking the light, right? So this is kind of like the top of the succulent is in full light, it's not hindered by anything, and then the bottom of this leaf is actually underneath these leaves, and so there's a shadow right there that is creating this this gradient of color. So as long as we have this shadow and it kind of gradually goes from dark to light, which is what a gradient is, then we're good to go. And now we're going to keep painting this way, but the trick is either to dry them individually, or when you paint the next one, move to a different leaf that is not touching this one that's wet. Because if you paint, like if I started to paint this leaf right here, for example, it would blend in with this leaf that's still wet. So we need to pick a different leaf that's not touching the one we just painted and do the exact same thing. And so that's my little trick for painting these without having to wait for everything to dry or to get out my little embossing heat tool to dry each leaf one at a time. You can just turn your paper around and paint another leaf that is not touching the wet one. So I'm going to paint this leaf the exact same way that I did the other one, and I'm going to do this one in real time to give you just one more demonstration. And then after I finish this leaf, I'm going to show you the rest in a time lapse. So we're starting this leaf the same way that we started the other one. First with a layer of clean water or with very light paint. And then putting some dark pigment along the bottom here, and then I cleaned off my paintbrush so that I can manually just kind of like tap the color, and that is what spurs it to move upward, to move out from the bottom, so it doesn't just stay really inky at the bottom. I want it to create a gradient, not just have these like little pigment clouds, right? I want it to be not necessarily super smooth, but somewhat smooth, to create just a cooler blended effect. So I'm adding a little bit more dark pigment, cleaning off my paintbrush, and then going back in. And after it's important to note too that once I clean off my paintbrush in my water cup, I'm going back to my paper towel and just giving it a quick flick on the paper towel to get off any excess water so it's not too watery. Because if you do this and your paintbrush has too much water in it, you're not going to be able to control the paint very well. The trick with watercolor and controlling the paint during the wet on wet technique is how much water you have on your paintbrush and on the paper, and also on your palette where the paint is. So the less water you have on your paintbrush, the better control over where the paint is going you are going to have. So, okay, that is the demonstration of creating that gradient, and now I'm going to leave it in a little hyperlapse so that you can see the rest of these leaves. Okay, so we have now finished shading in all of the leaves of the succulent. And so before quickly before this tutorial ends, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we did. So you'll notice that throughout the hyperlapse, sometimes I went back in with my paintbrush with like clean water and just barely touched the tops of the leaf. That was to push some of the paint downward if I wanted to keep some of the tops lighter. And sometimes I didn't quite touch the leaf ahead. That's kind of more like a personal preference. I think it looks kind of cool when there are these little white spaces in between the leaves, almost just to create more contrast. And sometimes, you know, it could look like the leaf is upturned a little bit or something like that on the succulent. And then as we got moved more inward toward the center of the succulent, I did have to get out my dryer and dry a little bit more often to avoid each leaf touching each other. So, but other than that, it's a fairly simple process, but the results are super cool when you can get this subtle gradient on each of these leaves. And I think it creates a really awesome looking succulent. So if you agree with me, let me know in the comments. If you decide that you want to try this along with me, I would love to see. Make sure to tag, if you post your artwork on Instagram, make sure to tag me at this writing desk, and I will see you next time.